Good afternoon. Our next speaker, Mr. Robert Powell, has been the Director of Research for MUFON since 2007, and he's also the head of MUFON Science Review Board. He's an active field investigator in the state of Texas, having completed over 120 investigations and is a member of the MUFON STAR team. He is one of two authors of the detailed radar witness report on the Stephenville lights. Robert is also a member of the Society for Scientific Exploration, the National Space Society, and the Académie de Ufologie, but I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right. Robert is active with FOIA requests to various government agencies to obtain information on historical cases, and he's also the co-author of the book published in July of 2012 entitled UFOs and Government, A Historical Inquiry. Please allow me to welcome to the stage Mr. Robert Powell.
Thank you, John. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, I hope you didn't eat too much food. If you start to get sleepy, I'll do a dance or a jig or something up here. We had a press conference yesterday, and one of the things that came out in this press conference was a question from George Nuri. I think you may have heard him by chance on Coast to Coast at different periods of time. George had a question. He said to the entire panel, "What can you tell us to the average man and woman who at their home are sitting there paying bills, worrying about mortgage problems, about family problems, job problems? Why should they be interested in UFOs?" I thought that was an excellent question. And I did not have a good answer, and I didn't comment at the time. A lot of us did. We didn't really give George a good answer. But I think what I will present here is the closest answer that I can give to George. Until you actually, well, let me back up. There's some of us that just have this insatiable curiosity. So for us, we chase UFOs. But there are others that live a normal life, and until an event actually happens, they sit back and they're really not concerned. Well, in Stephenville, Texas, that's what happened to over 20 witnesses. These were individuals who had never studied UFOs, were not interested in UFOs, but they were forced into the situation. And so then it did become of interest to them. So before I talk to you directly about what happened at Stephenville, I think it is important that you have a good understanding of three basic things. It will help if you understand the geographical area where Stephenville is located and the history of UFO reports in Stephenville. Have they always had UFO reports, or was this something new? And then the uniqueness of this incident. I think you will find that what happened in Stephenville is one of the most unique incidents in UFO history within the recent 1 to 2 decades. I know most of you probably don't like geography, but let's study this map for a little while. And I'd like to give some thanks to Richard Hoffman, who's the state director in Alabama and Mississippi, for making a great map for me here. If you look at this map, and I'm going to use the pointer here, many of you are probably familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's a large metropolitan area. But if you go directly southwest, you come to Stephenville, a city of about 17,000. Its elevation's around 1,300 feet. That's much higher than most of Texas. And their main industry is basically dairy farming. That's probably why you saw the media with all the UFOs and little cows running around. The city of Dublin, if you look, see if that arrow will drop to Dublin. That's a city about 10 miles southwest of Stephenville. And then just southwest of Dublin as a military operating area. This is where F-16s go and fly. And this military operating area is roughly the size of the state of Connecticut. So there's plenty of room for them to do their exercises. Okay, so try to, in your mind, orient yourself to where Stephenville is, where Dublin is, in the military operating area that's southwest of there. This picture is just a typical picture of the Stephenville area. It gives you a very good idea of what the land looks out there. I want you to see how flat it is and how clear the skies normally are, and that's the way they were on the day this event occurred. It was January 8th, 2008. It was at about 6 p.m. This next slide shows you the pathway of the F-16s to the military operating area. It's important to notice this. This pathway that you see is the path that those F-16s always take. They don't veer off north to the south because this is a lot of commercial aircraft fly through here, and those jets have to stay on that same pathway. The FAA mandates that. So what you're looking at is these jets flying into the military operating area. If you look towards the bottom, you will see a yellow rectangular area. That is the military operating area, and these are the flights the F-16 jets took on that day. The next thing I want you to have a feel for is what was typical of UFO reports in the Stephenville area. If you look at this graph and look towards the year 2005 and 2006, and you can see the cursor moving around those, the orange basically tells you what's normal, what would be expected for a city of this size in this type of area, and based on past history for Stephenville. The blue tells you what actually happened. And as you can see, 2005 and 2006 were normal years. I'm going to skip 2007 for a moment, and I'll explain to you why there's a little burp there. But look what happens in 2008. 54 reports came into MUFON that year. Those 54 reports were from citizens of those in that area, normal citizens. So what happened? Those F-16s that fly there have been flying since the late 1980s, early 1990s. I talked to the citizens that made the reports. They're familiar with F-16s. They know what they look like. So what happens in 2008 is not due to F-16s, just by logic. But I'll show with radar data, it's also not what happened. The 10 cases you see in 2007 were basically due to people who in 2008, because of this extensive concern about the UFOs, began to make reports. 2009, that continues. Then by the time you get to 2010, 11, and 12, you see that everything levels out. So you have to ask yourself, why would all of a sudden we get 54 reports in 1 year? It's not because suddenly they decided to realize there were F-16s in the area. It's because something unusual happened. The third thing that's important to understand about Stephenville, before I go into the exact details of that day, are types of UFO events. On this slide, you can see 3 different types. The first one is what I call the most common type of UFO event that we receive at MUFON. This is either a single witness or maybe 2 related parties, a husband and wife. They report a UFO, a given time, and a given location. Those are very common. The second type is not quite as common. You have multiple witnesses that do not know each other. They report a UFO at a given time and location. So that's like 7 p.m. You have a pair of witnesses over here that see a UFO, a couple over here that see the same UFO, and maybe an individual over here. Those aren't very common, but they still occur. And those are the type we really like to investigate. But what happened in Stephenville was different than both those. It was Category 3. We have multitudes of witnesses that did not know each other, that reported a UFO at various times and locations, but within a confined geographical area. So it's like number 2, where you've got these multiple witnesses, But it's like, okay, we've got multiple people that see this thing at 6 o'clock. Now we move over 20 miles. Multiple people see it at 6:30. Move 30 miles over here. All of a sudden, multiple people see it at 7 o'clock. It makes it very difficult to say this was the planet Venus, a comet, or almost any other explanation when you have this type of event. So now I'd like to talk to you basically on the basis of what's behind the Stephenville report. There's three basic things. We had over 20 sighting reports that came in of witnesses, and that's what I'll discuss shortly. Second, we had 10 Freedom of Information requests. Those were sent out to the FAA, Dyess Air Force Base, which is in Abilene, Texas, Shepherd Air Force Base, which is in Wichita Falls, Carswell Air Force Base, which is in Fort Worth, Fort Hood, which is in Killeen, Texas, Vandenberg Air Force Base, and even the Air Force Space Command. We received a response from only one, basically, and that was the FAA, which actually provided myself and another individual by the name of Glenn Schultz. Glenn is an Army radar specialist. He worked at White Sands Missile Base. He actually worked on using radar to reflect it off of the moon and bouncing it back in order to measure the distance to the moon. This was a job he had with the United States Army back in the 1960s. So Glenn basically showed me how to do the radar analysis. So a lot of this is owed to Glenn. Then what I've done is I've taken the witness data and combined that with the radar data to support what the witnesses saw. But what did I receive on the other 10 FOIAs? A FOIA, by the way, is a Freedom of Information Act request, which I think most of you are probably familiar, but if not, it's a request to the government to provide information. So we requested, for example, to the Air Force bases, do you have any radar information, any other type of information regarding these? Bear in mind, all of these bases have radar installations. Here's the answer that I received. And this answer was always the same. Whoops, let me back up. Well, it seems to have dropped off, but I can tell you what it was. We have no records responsive to your requests. No records responsive to your requests. What does that mean? That doesn't mean yes, that doesn't mean no. I mean, basically that they're not going to do anything. But we did get the FAA data, and that's what I want to talk about. So I'd like to put you in the chairs of the witnesses so that you get a feel for what happened that day. And then you be the judge of whether or not this was real, unreal, UFO, non-UFO, and you will be the judge on this. So we'll begin at about 6 p.m. on the night of January 8th, 2008. At 5:45, the sun is set. So by 6, the sky is still bright. You can't see any stars, but the sun's now below the horizon. At about 6:07 p.m., 4 F-16s leave Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, headed, remember, to that military operating area that's southwest of the Stephenville area. It's about 80 miles as the crow flies, and it'll take those jets roughly 10 minutes to make it to that military operating area. Now, the radar that we have, and we had 5 different radar sites, we used primarily the Fort Worth radar system. That antenna rotated every 10 seconds. So that means every 10 seconds, I know where the jets are. So we know where the F-16s are at every moment in time as they leave Fort Worth. I can actually see them leave the base, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. Now, there's one thing it's important for you to understand in order to get a good feel for this radar data. Most of your commercial aircraft have what's called, well, not most, all that you fly, have a transponder. That's basically just a radio signal that the plane sends out to the radar station that says, I'm Southwest Airline Flight 765, I'm at altitude 18,000 feet. If you are a military jet, or if you are an unknown object, you will not have that transponder. That's what happened in 9/11 when the terrorists took over those 4 jets. When they turned off the transponders, the only signal that radar receives now is the actual microwave beam bouncing off the planes coming back to the radar. And so when they did that, it disappeared off their screens. So that's what we're looking at here, is I was looking at the F-16s and following them from Fort Worth into this area. Now, I'm going to start this radar in a moment, but I want to explain a little bit so that you can understand what you're looking at. This right here is the radar, where the radar is located. This here, for example, 3414 is a transponder number of a commercial aircraft that's flying. 119, you add 2 zeros to that, and it tells you he is at an altitude of 11,900 feet. Down here is the location of Carswell Air Force Base. Southeast of there is the location of Fort Worth, Texas. Off the screen into the southwest is the location of Stephenville, Dublin, and that military operating area. Now, when this jet leaves Carswell Air Force Base, there will be 4 of them, so it's a squadron. The lead jet will have a transponder. That's required by FAA regulations. The other 3 jets will not. So to that extent, they're just like a UFO. However, I can track them on the radar. Why? Because I know where the lead jet is, and the radar is bouncing signals off the other 3 jets. And so I know the lead jet speed. I know the other 3 have to stay within 1 mile of him by FAA regulations. So I'm able to track every F-16 every moment of the way on the way to Stephenville. All right, so as you look at this, what you're looking at is basically a representation of what a radar operator would see if his radar system was looking at the primary radar. And the primary radar is the radar that's bouncing off the jet, not the transponder, but radar information bouncing off the jet. Now, as we look at this, this is transponder 5214. He's at 3,400 feet. This is the lead F-16 leaving Carswell. He's headed north, and he will now turn to the southwest. Now, see the little reddish-orange squares that show up, and sometimes it says unknown, here. Those are the other 3 in the squadron following him towards Stephenville. It's important for you to know this because later on, I have to discern the difference between an F-16 jet and an unidentified flying object. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, but the basic concept here that I want you to understand is that we know where the F-16s are at every moment in time. All right, so now it's 6:10 p.m. The F-16 jets, which left at 6:07, are almost already into the military operating area. The sun set, as I said before, but the stars are not out. There's still light in the sky. The first witness that reports is a truck driver. He's east of Stephenville in a small town called Selden. That's just like 2 or 3 miles south of Stephenville. So for all practical purposes, it's Stephenville. He sees 2 very bright lights that go from a stationary position, and he describes these lights as basically welding arc lights. In other words, they're so bright he can almost not look at them. And remember, this is not nighttime. This is still plenty of light in the sky. He sees these 2 lights directly in front of his windshield. He next indicates that the 2 lights move apart so fast that he cannot even discern when they left. It's such a fast movement. Meanwhile, and this is still in a 5-minute time window, 4 witnesses in a farming community in Selden, which is just south of Stephenville. They see 4 bright lights moving at an extreme rate of speed from the north-northeast. Among these is a civilian pilot, he estimates the object's moving at 3,000 miles per hour. Now, the reality is he can't know how fast that object is moving because he doesn't know how far away it is. But that is the perception that he has. So they're looking to the north and northeast. They see these four lights move across the sky at an extreme rapid rate of speed. Then they see them slow down as they get into the northwest portion of the sky. He sees the lights move to the west. When they get to the west, these four horizontal lights turn vertical. They become 11 lights. There's a flash of flame, and the lights disappear. All right, now we've gone through about 5 to 10 minutes of time. Now it's 6:20 p.m. Now we're 22 miles southwest of Stephenville. An elderly gentleman goes outside because his dogs are barking. His dogs sound afraid. He tells me they've never been afraid like this before. So he goes out to see why his dogs are scared. He looks towards Stephenville, 22 miles away. He sees 8 to 10 very bright lights in the direction of Stephenville moving rapidly to the south. Now we move 29 miles directly west of Stephenville. There's a chief of police who's driving due east towards Stephenville. This is, again, in the 6:20 to 6:25 p.m. time frame. He suddenly sees a very bright light in the sky. It catches his attention. It suddenly goes out, and 3 bright lights appear in a triangular formation around the location of the original light. Those go out, and then the center light comes on again. Now, meanwhile, back in Selden, remember the 4 witnesses who saw the bright object come out of the northeast, move to the west, and disappear. They now indicate from their home that they hear the roar of jet engines. They go outside. They see an unidentified flying object again moving, and they believe it's the same one, moving from the northwest to the southeast at an extreme rate of speed with 2 F-16s at a very low altitude. They indicate the altitude is so low that it is almost deafening to their ears. All right, now let's stop it for a moment and look at this map. This is an enlargement of the Stephenville area. Look down where you see Selden, and that's where we had the 4 witnesses. Now, the time frame, remember, is basically a 15-minute window when all of this happened. You have near Chalk Mountain, that red star right here. This is the direction that witness was looking. This is the truck driver who saw the 2 very bright welding type of lights. This is down in Selden's the 4 witnesses. Far down here in a small town called Proctor, this was the gentleman who had the 2 dogs that were scared, and he went outside to see what was happening, who was looking in this direction, and he sees the 4 very bright lights. And to the west, in Gorman, that is where the chief of police was as he was driving towards Stephenville, and he sees these very bright lights. So here is what's so unique about Stephenville, and we haven't even talked about the radar data. You've got 4 different witnesses within a very short period of time who basically see a different object, and they're all looking from different directions. What did the radar data show? Okay, let me look first at this blue line. This is a representation of what the 4 witnesses said they saw. An object moving very rapidly out of the northeast into the northwest. It begins to slow down. It comes here to the west, comes to a stop, and then disappears. Of course, the lights were horizontal. They go vertical. There's more lights, and there's that flash of fire. If you look at the red dotted lights, that's what shows up on radar. Radar picks up a point here. 20 seconds later, it picks up another point here. Now, I have to say that because I only have, in this case, 2 data points, if there weren't all these 4 witnesses in different locations, I could not say I would almost have to say, well, fluke. But when the data points are lining up in time, because this radar that you're looking at right here around this cursor, when those data points hit, it's in the same time frame as when all the witnesses see this. The speed I'm able to calculate because I know where the object was at this point on the radar, and I know where it was on this point in the radar. The speed of that object would have been 2,100 miles per hour. Now, I'm going to show you two more radar slides in a moment where it's even stronger than this, where we have many, many radar points, not just two. All right, now we move forward in time. It's 7:15 p.m. At 7:15, the stars are out. Not all of them, but most of them. It's dark. It's not like what has just happened under a more clear sky. I mean, the sky's still clear, but it's not light outside anymore. Now we're 10 miles to the southwest of Stephenville. And here we're talking about a county constable. I found out at one talk that not everyone knows what a constable is, but it's basically an elected official similar to a sheriff that we have in our Texas counties. So this constable walks outside, and he's right at the southwest corner of Dublin. He looks to the south of his home. And what he described to me was basically two very bright reddish-orange lights. And so he sees these lights, extremely bright, and he's never seen anything like this before. So he runs into his house to get his wife and his son to tell them to come outside and look at it. Well, his wife was watching her favorite TV show, and she wasn't about to get up, so she stayed on the couch. His 11-year-old son, however, went outside with him. They go back outside. He looks, and the reddish-orange lights are gone. Instead, he's now looking at, he estimated, 9 to 11 bright white lights, not as large as the reddish-orange lights, but more like stars, except these lights are moving all over the sky in a totally random, hectic formation. Now, this is pretty crazy, right? I mean, who would make something like this up? So he and his son continue to watch these lights. He goes to his truck, grabs his binoculars. He looks at them more, but he still can only see just the lights. At about that moment, these 9 to 11 random moving lights suddenly come together, and then they move towards the northeast, towards Dublin, at what the constable estimates is just an unbelievable speed. He doesn't even try to put a number on it. He just says they move so fast I can't even follow them hardly with my binoculars. So now what happens with the radar data? This is probably my most favorite of the radar information because we've got a lot of hits on radar, and during the same time that this constable was at his home, we're picking this object up on radar. So I'm going to start the radar up, but first let me just show you very briefly. Here's Dublin. Look where the cursor is circling. The constable, southwest of Dublin, that's actually 2 miles, so it's not very far. Dublin's a very small city, about 4,000 people. So the constable's 2 miles southwest of the center of the city. And we have this UFO showing up on radar. There is no transponder. That's why it's defined as an unidentified flying object on here. Now, technically, it could be any airplane, it could be anything. But I'm able to track its speed because I know where it is at certain points in time. Well, as we look at it right here, this object is basically stationary, very similar to what the constable indicated that he first saw. Reddish-orange lights that were just staying there. All right, here's Stephenville up to the northeast. I'm just trying to orient you. And these are just commercial aircraft that happen to be in the area at the same time. One there, one there, one there. Okay, so now you see the commercial aircraft moving. Every 10 seconds, this radar is sweeping. Here's the UFO. As you can tell by the distance between each little square, He's not moving very fast. And I'm going to speed it up just a little bit, if it will let me. What you want to watch for is, as you can see, north is at the top, south on the bottom, west, east over here. Here's the constable right here. This is south. So it's due south of where the constable's located, exactly as he described in his witness report, an object to his south. And now what we want to see is, will the object do what he said and move to the northeast at a very high rate of speed? Now this is the object still moving slowly south of his home. Now you just saw that. That was in 10 seconds the object moved there. The calculated speed is 1,900 miles per hour. To have a witness, two witnesses, that describe an object, and to get the radar data later, and to come back and actually see this, I felt was pretty amazing. All right, about the same time as the constable is witnessing all of this, we go back to Stephenville. There's another sighting occurring. A Stephenville policeman has just started his shift. It's between 7 and 7:30 p.m. He sees a stationary object within the city limits, and he could not estimate its size other than to say it was several city blocks long. It was so large that when I talked to him, he said he couldn't say if it was a disc, a triangle, or a square. All he knew is it took up the entire horizon in front of him. Well, at about that time, he also indicates that strobe lights come on. It has towers on it with strobe lights on its top and on its bottom. He describes the lights on the main body as like xenon lights in some of the newer cars that have those. And he describes each light as about 25 feet in diameter, and the object itself is several city blocks long. The officer turns to the left, so his vehicle is facing the object. He turns on his radar gun. The radar gun detects the object moving at 27 miles an hour. And this is an object that he describes as several city blocks long. Now, one of the first things that comes to my mind, because I'm always skeptic a little bit about things, is this guy making this up? Well, this is one of the reasons that I didn't feel he was. On the one hand, he's a policeman, so that makes it less likely. Second hand is, there's things happening in Stephenville and Dublin on this day, right? So that makes it not likely because plenty of other people are seeing things. But the third item was how he described this object when it took off. He says the object turns vertical and then slowly moves away from him. Now, if you're going to make up a story, why wouldn't you just say, yeah, I was sitting there and all of a sudden, zoom, zips off into the sky? But no, this guy says this thing turns vertical. That's totally non-aerodynamic. So that's further evidence to me that this guy was not making up a story. All right, now I'm going to go through the third radar data we have. This is the one that probably made more of a hit with the press because it involved what we then called the Western White House when George Bush was president in Crawford Ranch. This starts at about 6:40 p.m. There's a Stephenville businesswoman. She sees two large red lights directly in front of her vehicle. As she crests the hill near the farming community of Alexander, just south of Stephenville, she says the lights were so close that she pulled her car over to the shoulder because she thought that the aircraft were about to crash into her. She describes the closeness as being behind a school bus and looking at those big red lights directly in front of her car that a school bus would have. So that's her description of what these lights are like. With the radar data, we actually picked up an object near this lady at about the same time. And then we tracked it all the way down to Crawford Ranch. And this is actually what made me first detect the object. Because when we got all this radar data, I didn't go, oh, I wonder if this thing's flying towards Crawford Ranch. No, there's no reason. That's 50 miles to the southeast. I was looking at what the witnesses reported, and I looked for radar information that supported what this lady saw, and I saw it. And then I continued to see it on the radar, and the object continues to move. We tracked this object for over an hour. It moved at an average speed of about 37 miles per hour. However, there were times when the object accelerated to 532 miles per hour in one click of the radar. So that means within 10 seconds or less, it went from 37 miles an hour to 532 miles an hour. That's pretty close to a limit of what a person could handle in terms of G-forces. I'm going to show you now the radar data on this one. Oops. See if it will let me do it. No? Okay. So it's moving, but it's moving slowly. Well, you can see the UFO right here in yellow. What you see here are multiple airliners. I've sped this up, actually, because this took place over an hour. I know you guys wouldn't want to watch this for an hour. But so this is rapid speed up. But you can see Crawford Ranch right down here. And you can see the object. Where you see this big stretch right here was actually a point where the object disappeared off radar. And then we picked it up again about 15 or 20 minutes later. Within here, you'll see a larger jump, which is when it moved to a 532 mile per hour speed and then slowed down. Now, I want to say one other thing while we're looking at this. Glenn Schultz and I, after we did this data, we actually ran this by 3 different former FAA controllers, actually 2 former and 1 active FAA controller, because we were trying to figure out, okay, is there something we're missing? Is this not real? Or what's happening here? All 3 FAA controllers agreed with the analysis we did on this radar data. However, none of them were willing to have their names made public. I think it's started up again. For some reason, it stopped. While it's headed towards Crawford Ranch, what I wanted to point out is that there's a 6-mile zone around Crawford Ranch where even when the president was not there, that no aircraft are allowed to fly into. If the president was there, that zone goes out even farther. So here we have an object flying into a no-fly zone. You can't see them here on the map, but, well, you can. See that flight 5116? That's actually an F-16. He's flying back to Fort Worth. I would have to think that they could pick this object up. Perhaps not. I guess it depends on if they were looking at it. But at one point in time, these F-16s were within 2 miles of this object. There's absolutely no indication that the F-16s react to it. And what's even more amazing is that any object, because, right, if you're a radar operator, you don't know what this is. All you know is you have an object on your radar that does not have a transponder number. It could be a Piper Cub. It could be anything in that area without a transponder. So this is flying into a no-fly zone, and there's no reaction. I actually sent a Freedom of Information request to NORAD and to Homeland Security regarding this. And I basically said, in light of what happened on 9/11, how can this occur? They responded, we looked carefully at our radar data, and we did not see anything in the area. I replied back. I said the FAA radar data is part of what's called the Joint Surveillance System. The military has access to everything that's on FAA radar. I said I would be glad to work with your military radar specialists, and if I'm wrong, they can show me where I've made a mistake. I never heard a response to that letter. Lastly, on Crawford Ranch, let me tell you one thing. The reason we won't see it go clear to Crawford Ranch is when I first asked for the data, asked for it from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, because I didn't know what time frame, and I thought, well, 4 hours is a pretty big window. Well, at about 8 o'clock is when it's about 8 miles, 6 miles from Crawford Ranch and disappear. And it doesn't disappear off screen. I don't see it anymore because I don't have any data beyond that. But, and I'll just back up to here. I was able to actually locate 2 witnesses, a husband and wife, who were riding their bikes, and they were traveling within about 3 miles of Crawford Ranch. They lived near there. As a matter of fact, they told me that they could look from their front porch, and they often saw the helicopters landing at Crawford Ranch. That evening, they were riding their bikes. They don't know the exact time. The only thing they know for sure is it was between 8 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. As they're riding their bikes, they see a large object moving down from the sky towards Crawford Ranch. They described it as a light roughly 6 times as bright as the planet Jupiter. This husband and wife were fairly familiar with the brightness of some of the major celestial objects. So they described it 6 times brighter than Jupiter and a little bit larger than Jupiter itself. This object slowly moves down. They said it's almost to the ground near Crawford Ranch. And they said then, within 1 to 2 seconds, it suddenly moves horizontally and disappears from their view. And that was the end of what they were able to witness. So in summarization, I thought the reaction of the military was interesting. In my personal view, and that's all this could be, is my personal view, is that in general, our government doesn't like to give information to citizens. I don't necessarily feel they were trying to cover something other than they don't like to give out information. Second, the reaction of the citizenry. I think it's the same reaction any normal person would have. Most of these people that I talked to were average citizens, and usually seeing this did one of 2 things to them. They either, number one, became almost so enthralled with it that they had to figure out what was going on, and it began to consume their life. Or on the other hand, what you would see sometimes is as time goes by, the witness, and you may have heard this in some of the morning presentations, the witness wants to put it out of their mind. They don't want to think about it anymore. They don't want to talk about it anymore. They want to forget about it. Possible explanations. I talked to multiple people trying to come up with explanations of what happened in this event. And I can tell you it's obviously not an astrological event. There's no doubt about that. I cannot come up with any type of aerial craft that could have caused this. To my mind, it's totally unknown. And I don't think anyone can come up with a good explanation. We looked through every possible explanation to explain this one and could not. And I think that's what makes Stephenville such a unique case. Before I go to questions and answers, I just want to say briefly, after questions and answers, I have to go to the area where we have the books for sale. And this is a book that we published in July of last year. It's called UFOs and Government, A Historical Inquiry. Basically, it's a great book if you like research, if you want to understand the history of the UFO phenomenon, beginning in World War II until modern day times. It's 600 pages. There's a bibliography at the end of every chapter, which tells you where we got the information. And these all come from actual government documents that have been verified. So at the end, I will be there signing books for anyone who wants a book. So I can take questions and answers now about the Stephenville event or anything related to it.
This should be a relatively easy question. One of your early slides, you mentioned that the FAA has subsequently refused to release radar data. Can you comment on that? Was it as a result of this case, or is that a general across-the-government thing with the FAA and radar data?
Right, okay, that's a good question. The type of radar data that we received in Stephenville was what's called raw radar data. In other words, we had 5 different radar stations, and they gave me the actual radar data that came from each of those stations. That enabled us actually to track the F-16s quite well. Today, if you go to the FAA, they will no longer give you that type of data. What they'll give you is called INTAP data. And that's basically they merge the data from multiple stations, and they give you basically whatever their algorithm selects is the radar data, is an object's moving through the sky. So basically, they cordon off the map as a grid. And as you go through grids, maybe a radar in Fort Worth may be the primary radar in this grid. You move to here, now it's a radar that's down in Temple, Texas. And so the information you're getting is changing from different radar sites, while if what we received here was basically all the data. And actually, in October of 2008, I sent another Freedom of Information Act request for a similar type case, and they refused it. I basically petitioned, which I called the Fort Worth office, and they said, well, we had to refuse you, but it was because the Washington, D.C. office told us to. Basically, it's what she told me in so many words. So I had to petition to D.C. because that's the way the process is. Petitioned to them, and they said, no, we're not going to give you the data because it's a violation of our national airspace, because if you had this, you might know, for example, if the president's airplane was flying through Texas, you would know where it was. Of course, that's long after the fact. So I then sent them a new Freedom of Information Act request, and I said, I would like to know all of your internal documents where you made the decision to no longer give me that type of information. And which is a good thing for you guys to try. If if they ever finally deny you, send another one. I want to get the descriptions of all the discussion as to the decision, how it was made. So they send it back, and I get it just emails after emails of their attorneys internally talking about, okay, should we give Mr. Powell this information or not give him this information? And then they said, well, we think, and then one of them goes, well, I think we should, and then another one says, no, it's a threat to national airspace, and then another one goes, well, how should we go about telling him that? And so you get it's kind of interesting. You get to see their whole way they operate. Any other questions?
This is a little high for me, but hopefully people can hear me. I looked at the same data that you and Mr. Schultz did, and I found some other linearly flying craft, primary returns to the south of the Crawford Ranch, flying in the same general vector that the one that you and Mr. Schultz found. In addition to that, some of the debunkers said that craft was a high-altitude NASA balloon launched from eastern New Mexico. I can't recall the exact base where they launched their high-altitude balloons. I contacted NASA. They do not launch high-altitude balloons at that time of the year because the jet stream's too strong, and they don't want those balloons going over populated areas. And also another comment, you talked about the October 2008 sightings. I also received a pretty good package of radar data from the FAA and several eyewitness reports that I got out of CMS. Shows some pretty good correlations of objects right in the periphery of the Brownsville military operations area. And actually, I thought they were even better than the January wave. So I don't know what was going on in 2008, but something strange. So thanks for your presentation.
Thanks. He did make an interesting point, which I did not discuss in this, that there were other unknown objects moving in a very similar parallel path to the object that went towards the President's Ranch. And that is correct. There were some unknown. I didn't bring those into my report simply because we didn't have witnesses. And what I was trying to do in this report is to always tie the witnesses with the radar information. The entire report is about 76 pages. And if you want to receive the full report, as this gentleman had and has read, it's on MUFON.com. If you go to the MUFON website, and on the front page, I believe it's on the front page of the website, you can download the entire document. And we have an executive summary in the front that's only 2 pages, so you don't have to read the whole 76 pages. Other questions?
Hey, Robert. With your showing on radar an object moving at 37 miles per hour and then in 10 seconds moving at 532 miles per hour, what kind of feedback were you getting when you were, I guess, reaching out during your investigation to the military or FAA? What did they think it was, since it was proven on radar it was moving that fast?
They don't even reply. They just say, oh, okay, look, the question was, make sure everyone heard it, that we have this object 37 miles per hour that suddenly accelerates to over 500 miles per hour. What type of reply did we get back from the military, from the FAA? Basically, the reply you get from them is, we don't know anything about it. We don't have it on our radar. You know, we're not, you know, so they basically claim no knowledge of it. The strange thing is that that's their radar that I have. So I don't know how they can claim they have no knowledge of it. Now, one thing I'd just like to note on that same thing, when you hear sometimes on the news, someone will report a sighting, and they'll say, well, we contacted the FAA, and the FAA said, we didn't see anything. Here's what you have to bear in mind. When a radar operator is looking for air traffic, he's basically looking at only aircraft that have transponders. He can't look at everything that's on that screen. He's primarily concerned with getting that airplane from point A to point B safely. So as a result, if you have an object that was there that did not have a transponder, and I would assume most UFOs won't, it's very unlikely they're going to see it unless they go and pull back in their raw data. So they would have to go back and reanalyze that data and re-look it out on the radar screen and make certain that they had primary radar turned on, which is basically your reflections off objects of radar.
I just also want to comment, I think the book UFOs and Government is one of the best research books I've ever read, too. I'm only halfway through it since it's a monster of a book, but nice job.
Well, thank you very much. It is a big book.
Hello. How does this sighting relate to other sightings? Is it similar? Do some correlation. How does this one relate to others?
All right. The question was, what other sightings is the Stephenville case similar to? I guess I've looked at information on hundreds, if not thousands, of sightings because as a director of research at MUFON, often each month we will go through and quickly scan through sightings looking for very good cases. So I've looked at a lot of cases. I cannot actually tell you I know of a case similar to this. What's unusual is we have the radar data, and it matches up with what a witness saw. So I definitely, am not aware of a case that's on the ground similar to that. There was of course, the RB-47 case in 57, 59. Where one of our, basically an AWACS type of aircraft was flying from the Gulf of Mexico in the United States. I'm sure they had the radar data on that, but none of us have ever had access to it. I wish I could tell you I know of another case similar to this, but I don't. Sure. Oh, yeah. You might need a mic there, Richard.
publications you might want to mention, Robert, is the October 1967 Edwards Air Force Base incident that took place in the Los Angeles Air Defense Sector, where there were radar readings that are available now from 5 different radar installations during that incident in October, where they had, and they also managed to get several hours of recordings of the tower discussions between the pilots as they were chasing these objects. So.
What year was that? What year?
That was 1967, October of 1967. Was the Edwards Air Force Base incident. Lots of radar data, 5 different radar installations in the Los Angeles Air Defense Sector.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there are some similar to that. I guess when I was answering the previous question, I was thinking more of where we see this object moving in extreme rate of speed and having the multiple witnesses and that type of situation. But there are other cases. Well, actually, there's many cases where objects show up on radar. I mean, Blue Book itself has dozens and dozens of military cases where there's an object that shows up on radar, and military pilots see it, and it's reported, and it actually exists in Blue Book. If you go through a lot of the Blue Book cases, or in the book that we publish, UFOs and Government Historical Incident, we've got many of those, but not all of them. But the sighting of UFOs along with radar itself is not unusual. What was unusual in Stephenville is the large number of witnesses over an extended period of time in various geographic points.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a 2-part question. With all the interviewing and all the research that you've done, was there any one person that stood out that maybe gave some sort of assumption or inkling of why this incident was happening? And had there been no government interference, would it have been more than a sighting?
Let me make sure I understand your question. Are you talking about Stephenville?
Speaking to the people that basically had contact with what happened at the incident.
Could you repeat your question for me one more time?
Okay. With all the people that were interviewed, or the research that you've done, was there any one person that stood out that had any kind of assumptions of why this was happening, or given any information why it happened? And had the government not interfered with the jets, would it have been more than a sighting?
Okay, I think I follow your question well now. She asked me if what was the impression of the witnesses, and what if the government had not intervened. I can tell you most of the witnesses that I talked to, they didn't come and say, okay, I think this came from another world or there were aliens on board. These guys basically came and said, we saw this object, here's what it did. Do you have any idea what it is? Can you guys investigate it? What can you tell us about it? So it was more of them wanting to understand what they were seeing. It was clear to them that they weren't seeing F-16s because they saw those every day. So that was the main character that I saw behind most of the citizenry and the witnesses in this particular case. Now, I will mention one thing that I didn't earlier. When Stephenville first happened, the Air Force initially denied that there was any event that occurred. A reporter by the name of Angela Joyner called the Carswell Air Force Base. She talked to what she told me was a very gregarious public relations officer. He was a major. And he said, oh, yeah, I'll look into this for you. I'll do all these things. And then he called her back and said, you know, here's a couple of theories that might explain it. It might be a plane that the light reflected off of it. Might be this, might be that. Well, then a few more days goes by, and then the Air Force says, oh, we're sorry, there were F-16s. Because the first 2 weeks, the Air Force said there were no F-16s in the sky. Now, that really riled the local citizenry, because they knew that there were F-16s, and they knew that they had seen some things that were not F-16s. So Angela Joyner calls back to this gregarious major, and she says, Major, I can't recall his name, you know, what happened? Well, she doesn't get answers. She's had to call him. She finally gets him on the phone, and he says, "Miss Joyner, all I can tell you is," and then he reads this rote statement that he's been given. And she goes, "Oh, come on, Major, you were so helpful before. Surely you can tell me something more than that." "Miss Joyner, all I can tell you is." What that major had done was, after the Condon Report in 1969, the Air Force got out of the business. So when you call an Air Force base, they should answer, "We don't investigate UFOs. We haven't since 1969. Talk to someone else." Well, this major didn't, and it was clear he suffered the consequences. Let's see, Richard.
Hey, Robert. Was there any photographic kinds of things that you looked at in terms of, and was there any analysis done on any of that? I didn't hear that mentioned. Sorry.
Okay, the question was there any photographic analysis done?
Yeah, I believe I remember seeing that there were some photographs that were taken, I think, from different viewpoints. I don't know if that tied into anything.
I'm not aware of any photographs that were taken at the Stephenville event. I mean,
yeah,
are you aware of a particular photo?
Yeah, I remember some things surfaced where it showed there was even some squiggly lines and things like that.
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? Okay.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I answered that question as I'm not aware of it because in my mind I've already eliminated that one. The photos that had come out of Stephenville were basically a photo where you take a night video camera, and the civilian pilot who had seen all this really wanted an answer. He became obsessed with it, and he put out a $500 reward. Can someone bring me a picture of this UFO? I want to know what this is. So, $500. Well, people start taking their videos out and looking at night. Well, I don't think this was done intentionally, but one individual in the community, basically with a video camera, was photographing a bright star. Well, if you're not careful with a video camera, it immediately goes into overexposure because it's trying to bring in more light from that star. So now you're in an overexposure mode, which means it's sitting there very slowly with the shutter open, so any movement at all, and you get squiggly lines all over the place. So that was the photo. There was a video that came out that had that, but that was not related to the event itself. The event basically consisted just of all these witnesses and the radar data.
Hi, Robert. I'm a STAR team member with MUFON, and I got a call from Jim Carrion the last week of October 2008. Told me there was another flap of sightings in Stephenville, and that because of the first flap back in January and went into February, I guess, that all the investigators in Texas had taken time off from work, and they couldn't take any time off to investigate this new series of sightings in Stephenville. So I spent a week down there investigating the sightings that were in late October, and a number of stories. I've got reports. I've done reports on that. I talked to the reporter for the Stevensville paper that she took over from Angela Joyner after Joyner was fired. She already had a list of 12 names for me. That was my first stop. And I got the names from her, and I started from there. And when people found out I was in town, they started calling me. So I don't remember the amount of reports I took, but it sure gave me, and I had a sighting on my own while I was down there, an orange object. Not many people know of the second flap that happened in October of 2008. And it's very interesting. If we can talk later, talk to you about that too.
Right. Yeah, he's referring to a flap that occurred in Stephenville in October of 2008, and there was a lot of interest in that, and there's a lot of interesting information on that particular one.
Thank you.
Hi, Robert. You know about the BMU's dew line that goes across Alaska, Canada, and to Greenland? You know what I'm talking about? The early morning missile system we used to have when we were worried about Russia attacking.
Oh, okay. The question is, am I aware of the early defense warning line that we used to have across Alaska?
Yeah,
Yes, I'm aware of that.
BMU's or dew line. With the Freedom of Information Act, is there any active investigation going on all those sightings up there? I mean, is there some kind of area you can direct me to as far as any specific research for that particular area?
Yeah, I can't really help you a lot because I'm not very familiar with sightings that occurred at what we call the dew line.
Right.
In 1975-76, there were a lot of reports at B-52 bases along the northern United States, Loring Air Force Base. I think Minot was also one. I think there were a total of 3. There's another one in Michigan where there were unknown sightings that occurred within a few days of each other.
Yeah, I just figured with that sophisticated of a radar system that if with the Freedom of Information Act, maybe there's somebody actually investigating all the sightings that were up there.
I don't think the military will give you any of their radar.
I wouldn't think they would, but I was just thinking maybe there's somebody that is actually investigating it. I know it's all top secret, but all right, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. All right, I think that's all the questions we have. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to take just about a 15 to 20 minute break. We're a couple minutes early. Take this opportunity to go check out the vendor room, stretch your legs, walk outside. There's been some kind of differing information out there, contradicting information.